Hey guys, my name is Nick and welcome back to the channel, and in this video we are going to be taking a look at this shiny new Psychic Awakening book, Engine War. But specifically, I'm not going to go through the whole book. I'm looking at how this interacts with the armies that I collect, which in this particular case is going to be Imperial Knights and Chaos Demons. But the sub-faction within that is Tzeentch Daemons, as anyone who's been around this channel before will know that I'm a big Tzeentch kind of fan, with my 1,000 Suns as well as my Tzeentch Demon armies. Both of those armies are at sort of 4,000 points, so I'm a bit of an avid collector. I do have pretty much every unit that is available in the book, on the most part. But this specific video, we're going to be taking a look at Tzeentch Daemons. Is Engine War going to make our demon forces any better? I am going to be trying to pitch this in line with what we know so far with 9th edition. We don't know everything about 9th edition, so I'm going to try not to speculate too much, but I am going to be trying to interact with what we do know, with minimum speculation. I'm not one to try and second guess what we're going to be seeing, but hopefully we've got enough information from Games Workshop so far so that we can have a sensible talk about what's going on, and are demons, specifically Tzeentch Daemons, going to be any good going forwards later this year. So let's get straight into the video. So the first thing we want to do then is jump to the demonic section within the book. Now this starts on page 76 under Lords of the Warp and continues through to page 103. So we've got 27 pages of additional content on top of our Chaos Demon Codex to start with. The first page doesn't give us a huge amount to talk about with regards to Tzeentch specifically. It just really gives us the information on how to use the new data sheets, the stratagems, and the exalted greater demon section, as well as name generator. But it's mostly specifically aimed at our Slaaneshi brothers, who have all their new points for some of their new models, as well as some other discussion around some of the model changes. It includes horrors, for example. Now I'll get to that section when we get to that page in the book. One thing specifically to notice here in the small grey box at the bottom right of the page is match play rule for demonic jealousy. In a match play game, you can only select each exalted ability once. This does not prevent other exalted greater demons from having the same exalted ability or abilities, but only if they've been rolled for randomly. If you roll randomly, then you're going to be no problem. When you create your army list, you simply write the word random on your army list, and that's going to be fine. So we'll cover that exalted section shortly. So moving through the book then, for our Tzeentch Daemons, what we're going to get is an updated horror sheet, which is specific to Tzeentch. We've got some new stratagems. We've got the ability to create one of our Lords of Change into an exalted greater demon. We've got some new Hellforged artifacts, and we have a name generator. Not up to a good start so far. Pages 77 through 87 then is all about Slaanesh and all of their new units. And we don't get anything from Tzeentch until we get to the Horrors page. Comparing the existing Horrors page from our Codex Demons to this one, there are a couple of subtle changes, but on the whole, nothing really affects our army. They've moved around some of the special abilities out of the Psyker box and into the abilities box. One of those, for example, is Brimstone Horror. Previously, that would be written in the Psyker section, but this is now saying that you now have a rule called Brimstone Horror. So when a pair of Brimstone Horrors in this unit is selected as the source of manifesting or denying a power, that model is destroyed after that psychic power has been resolved or denied. We've known that before, which is one of the reasons why a lot of people will run a blue horror in that unit, and that will be your source of your psychic power so you don't lose a model. Weirdly, they've actually changed the way some of the wording actually looks as well. So going back to our Codex, originally Magical Hoard, for example, it's changed the type of this unit's coruscating flames to Assault 3 while the unit contains 20 or more pink horrors. The new wording is, whilst this unit contains 20 or more pink horrors, the type characteristic of coruscating flames that model in this unit are equipped with is Assault 3. Doesn't actually change the way that the thing works, but is just a rewording of the Magical Hoard ability. Seems a bit strange, but that's what they've done. Another one that's been reworded is Iridescent Horror. When you set this unit up for the first time, you select one pink horror in the unit. That model has an attacks characteristic of 2 instead of 1. The new wording is that an Iridescent Horror counts as a pink horror for the purposes of this unit's other abilities. I can see why they've done that, because Iridescent Horror didn't used to have a profile within the Codex Demons, but now it has its own separate line, which basically says I am a pink horror, but I have 2 attacks. That's the only difference in there at all. There are a few other subtle word changes, but the actual net effect so far that we know about doesn't really change anything to do with horrors at all. So it's got a whole new page. They've just broken down some of the rules. They've given us a stat line for Iridescent Horror, which I believe is actually on an FAQ on errata anyway. It's just not in the original Codex Demons book. Now, we don't get anything else for our Tzeentch Daemons until we hit page 93. So the next couple of pages are all about Khorne, Blood Crushers and Fleshhound stat lines. And then we get some pretty pictures of Slaaneshi models again. But until we hit 92, then 93, we get our Chaos Demon Stratagems. Now, there are 4 new stratagems depending on your allegiance. So we have 4 for Slaanesh, 4 for Nurgle, 4 for Khorne, and then finally we have 4 for Tzeentch Daemons. So I'm going to go through each of these in turn then for Tzeentch. The first one is Minions of Magic. It costs 1 command point, and you use this stratagem at the start of your psychic phase, and you select 1 horror infantry unit from your army, and the first time that unit attempts to manifest a psychic power in this phase, do not roll any dice for its psychic test. Instead, assume a 9 was rolled for that test. Now, what we know from horrors is when you do cast a psychic power, you are rolling 1 dice, and they only know Smite. So what you need is a 5+ on that first attempt of a Smite, and then you get the Smite off. Subsequent rolls after that will be a 6+, and then after that, a horror unit cannot actually cast a psychic power, because we don't have Brotherhood of Sorcerers or Brotherhood of Psykers within the Tzeentch Demon forces, so your Smite ability does increment. Of course, that is assuming that the Smite increment does roll over into 9th edition. I'm pretty sure that it will do. So in gameplay then, what this will mean is that we can start using Smite on our other units, starting with that 5, then 6, then 7 and so on, until we need to guarantee a 9, then we can use 1 CP and our Minions of Magic rule will kick in. Assuming a dice roll of a 9 is rolled, that does of course mean we don't ever get Super Smite, so it will just be D3 mortal wounds, providing that we have 10 or more pink horrors, otherwise it is just a flat 1 mortal wound. The second new stratagem we get is Warp Jaws for 1 command point again. Use this stratagem in the fight phase, select 1 Screamer unit from your army until the end of that phase. When resolving attack made by a model in that unit against a monster or vehicle, add 1 to the wound roll. I'm actually quite liking this one. It is fairly cheap. I've got a funny feeling Screamers might be the new Bay, the new go-to unit when it comes to the new edition. They're super fast with the shrunken minimum size board game, means that they could be getting into combat pretty quick. And with the new terrain rules that we're hearing about, with a lot more line of sight blocking, combat armies could be back. Only time will tell, of course. And Screamers are pretty good in combat. They already come with a native strength 6 that can be buffed to strength 7 with the appropriate tools. But when you're going against monsters and vehicles, you're now adding 1 to that wound roll, which means that we could be wounding with our AP-3 double damage close combat weapons, and that could start shredding monsters and vehicles that little bit quicker for only 1 command point, which is fairly cheap. The third one I equally like, Flames of Mutation. Any of my friends know that I like a good Flamer Bomb. For 1 command point, use this stratagem in your shooting phase. Select 1 Flamer unit from your army until the end of the phase. When resolving attack made by that model in the unit, an unmodified wound roll of 6 inflicts a mortal wound on the target in addition to any other damage. You can run Flamers in a unit of 9, and each one kicks out D6 Flamer shots, which is quite a lot. And now we're going to be getting 6s inflict a mortal wound. So there could be a number of dice here. 9d6 after a deep strike, for example, can put out a world of pain. And now we're getting those 6s to inflict a mortal wound. Very similar to a few other armies that have this native 6 ability, kicking out mortal wounds as well. It's only 1 command point. I'm a big fan of that, because if you hold them in reserve and do deep strike them, the chances are for that 1 command point you could be doing a lot more damage than you previously were. Finally then, as I said, there are only 4 new stratagems, which is very disappointing, is Warp Portal for 1 command point again. Use this stratagem in your movement phase, select 1 Flux Master, Fate Skimmer or Burning Chariot model from your army. Remove that model from the battlefield and set it up anywhere on the battlefield more than 9 inches away from enemy models. This model cannot move further this phase. Interesting use of command points here with our Fate Skimmer and our Flux Master. These are the more mobile versions of our Heralds. So one is either on disc or one is either on a Chariot, rather than the walking one only. And equally, our Burning Chariot is our mini Las Cannon totting exalted or greater exalted flamer on his little Chariot. So this gives us a redeploy of 2 characters or 1 heavy support option. Now, talking specifically about the Burning Chariot being able to do this, it is a big model because it does come on a large base, very similar to the Fate Skimmer. It has got a fairly reduced range. I believe its range is about 18 inches. But being able to redeploy it up the battlefield and get those heavy 3 shots off into an armoured target could prove fairly useful. It's only 1 CP. Getting up the board could be pretty good. It doesn't have the character keyword though, which means that it can get targeted pretty easy, especially if you throw it up the board anyway. Could be a bit of a disposable asset, but could be used to block or for added board control or for taking objectives. Now, we know there's going to be a lot more new missions coming out in the new book, and there's a lot more involved here in missions and points and secondary objectives and so on. For 1 command point, this does give us a lot more option and manoeuvrability to stick something up that's fairly tough. 4+ invulnerable save with 8 wounds. Putting it up the board could be a bit of a hindrance. And I believe what they're talking about in the new missions is you don't have to sit there on an objective forever. It's resolved at the end of the command phase if you control that objective until it's then taken off of you. So you could get there and then move on. Slinging a Flux Master or a Fate Skimmer up the board. They are characters. They cannot be targeted normally from shooting. Certainly in 8th edition, I believe that rule should be carrying over into 9th edition. I think it's a very good rule. Sending characters up. I can only see really a use for this is when other units deep strike in. Because you use it in your movement phase. You can put a character up into a sensible location, and then at the end of the movement phase, when deep strike occurs and you start placing units down at the end of the movement phase, you can then surround your character and not have to put that character in reserve with it. At the moment, it costs you 1 command point to put a unit into reserve, and if you put any more in, it costs you 3 command points. So it's a bit of a burner. But now this makes it a little bit cheaper to send your characters up to buff a unit that you're then going to bring in at the end of your movement phase. So for me, not too bad at all. Going to be situational, going to depend on your army, but I see that having some good value around targets, around objectives, and around buffing units that are going to come in via Deep Strike. We then move on to page 96 next, and the final section that we really want to talk about, and this is Exalted Lords of Change. So we've seen in the Space Marine Codex where you can basically buff your chaplains and apothecaries and so on with a command point to make them a master version, which gives them some extra abilities. We've now got something very similar for our Lords of Change. So how this works then is for 1 command point you use this specific stratagem before the battle, and you select one of your Lords of Change model from your army that is not a named character. So basically that excludes Kairos Fateweaver.
Denied.
And until the end of the battle, that model gains the Exalted keyword, and you select one of the Exalted Lord of Change abilities below for this model for the duration of the battle. Alternatively, you can randomly determine 2 abilities by rolling 2d6 and applying them both to the model for the duration. Any doubles you re-roll until you get 2 different results. So as I said at the earlier part of this video, if you pick 2 Lords of Change and spend 2 CP, and then you manually pick 1 ability, you can't duplicate it. But if you randomly roll for it, you could end up with the same abilities across 2 or more Exalted Lords of Change. So this is split into 6 abilities because you roll that d6 to randomly pick, 2d6 randomly to pick, or you manually pick 1. The first one is Mastery of Magic. This model knows an additional psychic power from the Tzeentch discipline and can attempt to manifest 1 additional power in each of your psychic phases. Now there aren't a huge amount of really good psychic powers in the Tzeentch discipline, and that's the disappointing bit about the Mastery of Magic. And if you really want to know all of the powers and cast any of the powers, you just take Kairos Fateweaver anyway, so for not very many more points. So I'm not really sure yet what the the benefit of Mastery of Magic actually going to be. The second one, though, was actually put up on Games Workshop's community page, and that is Spell Thief. When this model successfully denies a psychic power, the psyker that attempted to manifest the power loses it and cannot attempt to manifest it again in the battle. I really like this one. I think this really fits into a Tzeentchian theme, that you can basically go and start stealing enemy characters or enemy librarians or enemy psychers in general. You can start nicking some of their abilities. I really like it. Stealing Smite off of the opponent's only source of magic, for example, could be really powerful. Or some of their other buff abilities as well. You know, there's some very common psychic powers that are still used in 8th edition, which will probably still be quite powerful in 9th. Being able to steal them is pretty good. So yeah, I quite like that one as a picker rather than a randomly rolled for. The third one then is Lord of Flux. When an enemy unit suffers mortal wounds as a result of a psychic power manifested by this model, that enemy unit suffers an additional mortal wound. For example, Smite to the nearest visible enemy would be D3 plus 1 mortal wounds. Now this is very similar to, I believe, Psychic Blast in the Thousand Suns from their Psychic Awakening book, where they get an ability to add mortal wounds to your damage output. Again, quite like this one, especially as it said with a Smite. I think that's pretty cool. Any ability to output additional damage without having to do anything is always a winner. The fourth one then is Nexus of Fate. If this model is on the battlefield at the start of your turn, roll a d6. On a 1 or a 6, you immediately gain a command point. Now, command points are changing in 9th edition. Anyone who's not aware of this, go and check out the Warhammer community page. Your command points are now set by the size of your battle. So pretty much 3 command points for every 500 points rounding up. So a 500 point combat patrol, you'll get 3 command points. 1,000 points, or 501 to 1,000, you'll get 6. 1,001 to 2,000, you'll get 12. 2,001 to 300, you'll get 18 command points. Most games are played between that 1,000 and 2,000 bracket. If you hit 2,000 points, you'll get 12. Command points are still going to be as powerful, probably, if not more, because of the way you now need to spend them to unlock detachments, which is another subject on its entirety. Being able to regen command points is a good thing. In addition, as we know from all the releases from Games Workshop, you will also gain a command point at the start of every one of your own command phases. So keeping that one-upmanship throughout the game is probably going to be a good thing, especially as you get towards the latter end of the game. Number 5 then, we have Aura of Mutability. When this model would lose a wound as a result of an attack, roll a d6. On a 6, that wound is not lost. After a unit has finished resolving all of its attacks against this model regains 1 lost wound for every wound it negated because of this ability. So this is Feel No Pain plus. So we can now shrug any wound that we lose, because it doesn't specifically say it ignores mortal, on a d6 of a 6. We get a 6 plus shrug save. Now for every shrug that we are successful in, we gain a wound back. I think this is one of the a big thing really for Tzeentch Daemons, is that any big demon model really suffers with being shot off the board in turn 1 throughout 8th edition, to the point where big models just don't really cut it and everyone just runs demon princes because they're small, you can hide them, they're characters, you can't snipe them. So yeah, this is a big thing to aid survivability and bring your demons, you know, keep those wounds regenerating, but it is only on a 6, so the more it gets shot, the more it can rebuff itself. That's pretty much how I look at it. Finally then is Architect of Deception. When resolving an attack made with ranged weapons against this model, subtract 1 from the hit roll. This is the index version of the rule of the Changecaster, which was an aura effect which was removed, but we now get a -1 to hit our Lord of Change with this particular ability on your exalted Lord of Change. We know that modifiers are having a bit of a rework and that they're not going to stack, so you're pretty much going to be either +1 or -1, and I don't believe you can do any more than that unless there's an overruling rule in an ability that will allow you to take extra stacking modifiers. But we were told by Stu Black, from the head of Warhammer 40k, that modifiers are not going to overly stack, so that you're not like -10 to hit a Raven Wing or whatever. So for me, anything that can debuff your opponent is probably going to be exceptionally strong, because there might not be that many sources of it. So if you can get that -1 to hit, you're going to be in a good place. Again, this aids your survivability of your greater demon. So looking at all 6 then, My opinion is Architect of Deception, -1 to hit, is probably the strongest one here. I would then say Aura of Mutability for that regen and that 6+ shrug. Then probably Spell Thief. And then the others, yeah, I'd go Nexus of Fate for the command point, Lord of Flux, and then Mastery of Magic being the last one. So if you're going to pick, I would pick the -1 to hit. If you're randomly rolling, you really probably want the 5 and the 6. But I think only time will tell to see whether even taking a Lord of Change is still a thing. We know that points are going up. These are already very expensive. They've already been adjusted many times in the 3-year life cycle of 8th edition. They've come down and down and down, and now if they go back up again, are they going to be valid? I guess we're going to know when we know what the other HQs and the other characters are going to do with their points adjustment to see where we're at. Next up then, we have some artifacts of change. So we've got 3 new artifacts for our Tzeentch Daemons. The first one is a Warp Fire Blade, and this replaces models with a Baleful Sword only. Now these only come on Lords of Change. This relic replaces that Baleful Sword and has the following profile. It's a melee weapon, +2 strength, -3 AP, and a damage of D6, and an ability of when resolving an attack made with this weapon, an unmodified wound roll of a 6 inflicts D3 mortal wounds on the target in addition to normal damage. The Baleful Sword originally then was +1 strength and AP -3 and D6 damage, and you also subtracted 1 from the hit roll. So our Warp Fire Blade is now giving us +2 strength, giving us strength 8, but we are not -1 to hit either. Other than that, the AP and the damage is the same. So if you are taking a Lord of Change with that Baleful Sword, a Warp Fire Blade could be an auto-include here as your relic. Secondly then, we have a Soul Eater Stave. Roll 1d6 when a psychic power manifested by a model with this relic destroys an enemy model. On a 4+, the model with this relic immediately regains a lost wound. A model cannot regain more than 9 lost wounds during the same turn as the result of this relic. So note here then, this is enemy model. Now, a Lord of Change comes with, providing he's not degraded, 5 attacks. So for every model he kills in a particular turn, you've got a 50-50 chance of regaining wounds. Again, this goes back to the survivability of Lords of Change and Greater Demons, where traditionally they are just shot off the board. But it does encourage you to get in the mix here and get into combat. Now, it does have the monster keyword. So, going back to some of the conversations with Games Workshop that have been announced, monsters and vehicles are having a bit of a rework to become a little bit more powerful. I'm hoping then that monsters, as a Lord of Change, could potentially make them a little bit viable. Again, it goes on. Are points going to be preclusive here, and you're going to still run with Demon Princes or your lesser Heralds? Or is this going to make you think, actually, do you know what? Lords of Changes are going to be bloody awesome because the new monster keyword, well, the old monster keyword that's been given a rework, combined with some of this survivability that we've now got baked in, with things like Soul Eater Stave or Aura of Mutability, is that going to keep them going longer and not be dead before you've even thrown your first dice? The final artifact of change then is the Crystal Tome. At the beginning of your opponent's turn, select one enemy character model within 12 inches of a model with this relic. You and your opponent then roll off, and your opponent adds their leadership, and you add your leadership to your score. If the total equals or beats your opponent's, then all aura abilities that their character model has cannot be used until the beginning of your opponent's next turn. Now this again was out on the Warhammer community page as something to talk about. Stealing auras, and I think they specifically targeted those pesky Primaris Lieutenants here with their aura ability for re-rolling wound rolls of 1. Now this is quite a close range thing. This is a 12-inch ability, and you are then having to roll leadership. Now a leadership of a Lord of Change is 10, so it's pretty high, and most other characters are going to be 8 or 9. Very few leadership 10s unless they are big Lords of War, you know, like a Rebuta Gilliman, I think he's a 10, and most Necrons are also a 10. So you're then at a 50-50 if you're going against other leadership 10s, but most of the time you've probably got a slight advantage. And to steal an ability could be exceptionally strong, but again, it relies on your Lord of Change being in the mix, being up front, and in and around those characters that are generating those aura bubbles. So this does go back to what I was saying before with the monster keywords, the survivability changes that we've now got that we can stack into our Lord of Change, specifically the Exalted one, obviously. This could be useful, but is it as good as the Warpfire Blade or the Soul Eater Stave? I think it's going to be very situational dependent. Depends how many auras your opponent's got. I mean, everyone has an aura ability if they are a character, and they are going to be putting out something. Maybe it's not enough just to do it for a turn. I'm not so sure whether that is strong enough, but it is the first time that we've seen something like this that can remove auras. So hopefully it remains unique to the Tzeentch Daemons, because I don't want to see these blanket rules under a different guise appearing across different factions, because then they become a little bit bland and you see the same rule just carbon copied but with a different name. So I'm looking forward to giving it a go once we can actually get some games going, and we'll see how it does in 9th edition. I think because of the survivability and the new changes to the monster rules, once we know what those look like, this could be quite good, but at the moment I'm on the fence with it. And that wraps up all of the content in Engine War for the Tzeentch Daemons. So there we go then, guys. That is Engine War for Tzeentch Daemons. I'm not super confident that my Tzeentch Daemon forces are still going to be able to, well, they couldn't in 8th, to be honest, cut the mustard on the whole against some of the stronger armies out there. There's a few tricks, there's a few tips in there, especially around sort of the modifiers and the way that modifiers are going to be capped in 9th edition. There are some new stratagems, but there aren't enough. But there are some abilities in and around some of our exalted kind of bits and pieces. But one of the big downsides of any Tzeentch Demon, or in fact any demon force, is that the bigger the model, the easier they are to shoot, and you kind of lose a lot of points very quickly. I'm hoping that the minimum size, now this is minimum size board changes, may have an impact on how shooting armies versus more close combat armies will potentially interact on the battlefield, but only time will tell. I'm not super convinced, as you can probably tell. But I'd love to know in the comment section below what you think. If you've got yourself Engine War, you're a demonic player, do you think I'm on the money here, or do you think I've got a few things wrong? The comment section is that place for you. But in general, if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I shall catch you guys on the next video.